Very good morning, class. I hope my voice is not breaking. I hope I'm audible. I understand as I can see the pictures. My voice might be breaking a bit. Let's. Why don't you type in your messages? Please type in your messages. I want to know whether my voice is breaking or not. Good morning, everyone. Deepak, Tajinder. So I'm audible. So hopefully this class will be a quick revision of what I taught in the previous class regarding COPD, and now we gonna wrap up this session with the treatment modality in COPDs. Okay. As we talked about COPD, we know the classification. We talked about the classification where it is a chronic, inflammatory, obstructive, non-reversible pulmonary disorder or other pulmonary disease. And you have you have two types. One is chronic bronchitis, and the other one is emphysema. Chronic bronchitis, where you have cough which is persistent for 2 consecutive years and for more than 3 months a year, and emphysema, which is anatomical dilatation of the bronchioles and the alveolar, basically the bronchioles. So apart from the classification, we talked about the risk factors, where cigarette smoking is supposed to be more than 90% responsible for COPD globally. Then you have your other risk factors like environmental risk factors, occupational risk factors like silicas and coal mines, and then you have other environmental risk factors as well. Then you have something called a genetically or predetermined condition, which is autosomal dominant, which is alpha-1 antitrypsin, where a deficiency of a trypsin, where you have inability to break down collagenase, and there is a deficiency of antitrypsin enzyme, which is trypsin, which is responsible for breaking down the collagens, and that comes in parcel with the liver disease, that antitrypsin deficiency. Then we talked about how the patient presents, what are the investigations of choice, and as you know, COPD patient presents with breathlessness, wheeze, dyspnea, then they have cough as well. So fatigability, loss of appetite. So there is myriads of symptoms by which the patient present to you in the cases of COPD. But there will be a positive history, and you can find out on clinical examination. You can have hyperresonant bed sound and auscultation. You can have wheeze. Then you can have even dull on percussion. You might have a dull sound, and you might have not dull. Basically, you will have a hyperresonant sound on percussion, and on the auscultation you might find out wheeze. And sometimes you can find out inspiratory crackles too. Then on examination, on blood investigation, you can find anemia can be there. Patient might be having hyperinflated chest, which can be seen on the chest X-ray, where you will have more than six intercostal space. When you see the X-ray, you will find the size of the lungs will be more than 6 intercostal space. Then you might on ABG you will find out hypoxemia as well as hypercapnia, more there will be decrease in PCO2 and increase in PCO2 and decrease in PO2, and pH will be more in range of less than 7.4. So the patient will come to you with respiratory acidosis. That will be the blood picture when you take an ABG. And then you have definitely spirometry, which is the gold standard of diagnosis. In spirometry, you will look for FEV1 and the ratio of FEV1 and FVC. So FEV1 is forced expiratory volume in 1 second, and C is forced vital capacity. So that is maximum air you expire after maximum inspiration. So usually the ratio will be less than 0.7, and FEV1 can be less than 80%. But what is more important, that the irreversible bronchodilator inhaler or inhalation of a bronchodilator, you will find that FEV1 ratio, the increase in FEV1 will be less than 12%, or less than, basically less than 12%. So that shows the irreversibility, and that is one diagnostic criteria for COPD, which is contrary to what happens in asthma, where you will have reversibility, and on bronchodilator inhalation you will find the FEV1 rises by more than 12%. So today we'll talk about the management part. So we'll start with the management of COPD, and the management part, which is very important to underline, is you can have a patient with a chronic stable phase COPD, and second category is a patient with acute exacerbations. So chronic stable phase basically is, there is again lots of classification, lots of international classification. We'll talk about it in the later slides. But what is important is we should know that apart from the pharmacotherapy, there is something called non-pharmacotherapy, and one of those is like especially in selected cases of emphysema, you have 3 important interventions. Smoking cessation is a standard, most important and standard treatment for any patient with COPD. The most trusted treatment is smoking cessation. Oxygen therapy, there's a lot of COPD patients who are chronically stable, and they are dependent on oxygen for a quite long period of time, and they might require oxygen up to 15 hours a day. So this is one of the therapy which is keeping your PO2 around 90 to 92%, or arterial oxygen saturation more than 55 millimeter of mercury. That is our goal basically in such patients. Then there is something called lung volume reduction surgery, which happens only in a very selected cases of emphysema, and they are basically directed at improving symptoms and decreasing the frequency and severity of exacerbations. Now I won't count it under pharmacotherapy, but smoking cessation is one of the most important and trusted modality, where whenever you have a case of COPD, because nothing works if the patient keeps on his smoking habit. So first and foremost, for the drugs to act and to work in the betterment of the patient, first and the foremost is smoking cessation. And let's see if, I hope my voice is not breaking. Looks like it's not breaking. So smoking cessation is most important. We have different pharmacological approaches to this problem, but the most important I consider is personal motivation. Very important for patient to understand the gravity of it, and personal motivation goes a very long way, and through the socioeconomic motivation, as well as The family support is very important in instilling this very notion in such patients that smoking cessation goes a very long way in keeping the patient asymptomatic and preventing the patient from going into exacerbation and prolonging his lifespan. So four principal pharmacological approaches are something called bupropion. Then you have nicotine replacement therapy, which is available as a gum, transdermal patches, inhaler, and nasal spray. And then you have something called varenicline, which is a nicotinic receptor agonist antagonist. It helps to it prevents nicotine from binding to the receptors. Then there is something novel modality. You have a nortriptyline, which doesn't have as potent action as all the other three drugs. But the most importantly, apart from all this pharmacotherapy, the personal motivation is very important. So now the bronchodilator, as we have learned in asthma also, the bronchodilator which we use in COPD also, it categorized under two classification. You have anticholinergics and beta-2 agonist. So basically inhaled bronchodilators are the mainstay of treatment of COPD. There is what happens in asthma, there is no evidence that regular bronchodilator usually slows deterioration of lung function, because COPD is a non-reversible and a progressive disease. What it helps in symptomatic relief and helps in prolonging the life. And then another thing is the anticholinergics have a greater bronchodilator effect than beta-2 agonist. So beta-2 agonist, drugs which comes under short-acting beta agonist and long-acting beta agonist. You have two classification. In short-acting, you have salbutamol, albuterol, terbutaline, and in long-acting, you have a salmeterol, formoterol, indacaterol, and pambeterol. So they have different doses and different strength of administration. And so beta agonist, basically, as we know, it acts on beta receptors on the epithelial cells, and through acting on the beta receptors, what it does, it helps in bronchodilation. But since it acts on the beta receptors, you have certain side effects of very common adverse effect. That's tremor and tachycardia, which is very common adverse effect of beta agonist. Then anticholinergics, you have as we learnt in asthma. So the anticholinergics, you have short-acting anticholinergic and long-acting anticholinergic. We call it short-acting muscarinic and long-acting muscarinic antagonists. So what anticholinergic do? It binds to the cholinergic receptors, and again it induces bronchodilation. And it is proposed that the bronchodilation, which is brought about by these muscarinic antagonists, have a far larger effect than beta-2 agonists. So you have short-acting muscarinic antagonists, you have ipratropium and oxytropium, and long-acting is tiotropium. What are the important perceptible side effects of these anticholinergics are urinary retention, dry mouth, tremor, tachycardia, and you have to use it with a pinch of salt in cardiovascular patients. So these are important side effects. While especially I'm trying to highlight this because while we have to choose certain patients from their personal perspectives, we have to look on the side effects while we're trying to administer anticholinergic or beta-2 agonist. Steroids in stable COPD. One of the most important thing is steroids doesn't have a major role to play in COPD. This is in contrast to what happens in asthma. because in asthma there is a persistent inflammation. In COPD, you have more of a irreversibility and progression than more of a persistent inflammation. It might get exacerbated. So in that cases where inflammation is present and gets exacerbated, that is when you have a role of steroids. But it can be used as part of a combined regimen, because as a sole therapy it is not very potent in COPD, and as you can see, the regular treatment, it does improve symptoms and lung functions and quality of life, and reduce frequency of exacerbations in COPD with FEV1 less than 60%. But it does not modify the long-term decline of FEV1 or mortality. Then the other thing is, what is very important to know, as we'll come across in the next few slides, there has been, as we know, the side effects like their use has been associated with oropharyngeal candidiasis and osteoporosis, cataract, then edema, chances of heart failures. There are innumerable side effects which we have been which is associated with glucocorticoids, but these are the very common one with the inhalational one. And the other thing is, uh, glucocorticoid in COPD should be considered mostly in those patients who goes in for frequent exacerbation, which can be defined as more than twice in a year, and a patient where you have significant amount of acute reversibility in response to inhaled bronchodilators. So these are the two conditions where you can start on inhaled glucocorticoid in combination with in long-acting beta agonist for a longer period of time. Again, the oral glucocorticoid, the use of oral glucocorticoids is not recommended because of unfavorable benefit and risk ratio, as you all know, and the side effects, as you all know, the certain side effects, and the risk benefit is not enormous. So glucocorticoid, when we come through the next few slides, we'll see that especially in patient where you have eosinophil count more than 300, more than 100, where it really works in a better way, works in a more selective way. So very importantly, you have to look for the eosinophil counts. As you can see, in asthma, the role of glucocorticoid is more potent than they have in COPD. Then there is another class of drug. We have theophylline, methylxanthine. These are phosphodiesterase inhibitors, and this again act through the, as you remember in your physiology, this through this cyclic, those cyclic AMP pathway. So it indirectly it again goes into promote bronchodilation. And it is what is important to know, apart from it has improvement, it does improve expiratory flow rate and vital capacity, especially in patients with moderate to severe COPD. And as you all know, it has a very common side effects of nausea, tachycardia, tremor, and most importantly, it has a very narrow window period of safety plasma profile. And so its dosing is very important. It's very strictly to be used in a very regulated dose, because it has certain side effects, very known potent side effects, even pro-arrhythmogenic it is. And but what more importantly, it is not a primary drug for or primary liver or control of COPD. It is basically more in favor of supplementary or added drugs for COPD. Then you have something called phosphodiesterase 4 inhibitors in the form of roflumilast, which again can be used as an added or supplementary therapy, especially in the cases of moderate to severe exacerbation. And it has certain side effects like nausea, pain, abdomen, diarrhea, and insomnia. So So again, another important point is the roflumilast and theophylline are almost same group of drugs, so they should not be used they should not be given together, because that might lead to very enormous side effects, because they have a very narrow therapeutic window level. And the other thing is they are basically used as a supplementary or added therapy. And one most important point is vaccination. But this is the important thing, is that patient with COPD should be vaccinated for at least influenza vaccine and polyvalent pneumococcal vaccine. As the same point we reflected in seminar on the class on asthma, vaccination for influenza and pneumococcal is most important in cases of COPD. There are certain other proposed therapy which is not being recommended by several other organizations, but they are like acetylcysteine, antitussive, vasodilator like nitric oxide, drugs to treat pulmonary hypertension. As we know, the COPD can lead to pulmonary hypertension. Then montelukast and antibiotics. So again, this is a specific form of intravenous alpha-1 antitrypsin augmentation therapy in alpha-1 antitrypsin deficiency cases, where when you find a serum when you measure the serum A180 level, and if it comes less, so this augmentation therapy can be tried in such patients. Then oxygen therapy, as we talked about, oxygen therapy can be up to 115 liter per day. The requirement can be, and it has to be continued until the patient's SpO2 is less than 88%, or the arterial pressure is less than 55. It has to it's given to the patient. And another thing is, as we talked about, there is a lung volume reduction therapy. We talked about these two before. And finally, the lung transplantation. COPD is currently the second leading indication for lung transplantation, and especially the patients who are selected for lung transplantation, they should have, the age should be less than 65. They should have a severe disability, and despite maximum medical therapy, and they should be formally be freed of all the comorbid conditions like liver, renal and cardiac diseases. So this is another tool. This is assessment tool. This is what I was trying to talk about. When you select a patient of COPD and how to initiate your treatment, this is the basic chart which you should remember. We have a grading, and this is it is basically based on GOLD grading of COPD diseases. You have some ABCD assessment and GOLD severity that is being done through spirometry. So you have a GOLD severity index, and you have then ABCD assessment tool, which was brought down by the global initiative on chronic pulmonary obstructive disease. So how do you assess a patient? When a patient of COPD, how will you initiate your treatment? And basically you have to look into two things. There is something called GOLD severity grading, where you have you can categorize the patient based on spirometry, and where you have a grade 1 is with FEV1 less than greater than 80%. GOLD grade 2 is one with the FEV1 around 50 to 80. Grade 3 severity index is with FEV1 30 to 50, and GOLD grade 4 is where you have FEV1 less than 30. So this is the severity index which is being judged through spirometry. And the other one is ABCD assessment tool, where you have to take into account there's something called modified medical research council criteria, where it's a modified medical research council dyspnea scale, where patient symptom is assessed according to the gradings, where I have grade 0. I talked about in the previous slide also. The grade 0 is if the patient says that he gets breathlessness with strenuous exercise. That is, strenuous exercise is almost more than normal, what is his normal routine, that is something more than his normal routine. Then modified MRC grade 2 is something where he says that he gets short of breath when hurrying on a level or walking up a slight hill. मतलब walking up a slight hill or hurrying on the level, but that is even a normal activity is going to certain extent going to cause him discomfort. Then that is MMRC grade 2 is when a patient says he can walk slower than people of the same age on this level because of breathlessness, and he had to stop for catching up the breath, then walking his own pace on the level. So that comes in the grade 2. Then MMRC grade 3 is a patient has to stop for the breath after walking for 100 meters and after walking for a few minutes on the level. That comes under MMRC grade 3. Then you have MMRC grade 4. So MMRC grade 4 is patient says he is too breathless to leave the house, or even he is breathless to get dressed up, or even to undress himself. So this is basically as good as breathless at rest. So this grading is very important, and this is the post bronchodilator FE1. This is the spirometry, through spirometry, the Gould classification of the severity index. As I talked about, Gould severity 1 is mild, where FEV1 is greater than 80%. Gould 2 is moderate, when FEV1 is 50 to 80. Gould 3 is 30 to 50, and Gould 4 is very severe. So this criteria, then CAT stands for COPD assessment test. That is beyond the at your level. Let's not talk about that. But then that again you have certain symptom related questionnaires, and where you can assess the points. So it has been through the ABCD assessment tool, the modified research council. The patient has been categorized under 4 categories: A, B, C, D. Category A is where you have MMRC 0 to 1. As we talked about MMRC 0 to 1, I'll show you. 0 to 1 is for patient get breathless with strenuous exercise or doing anything more than normal, or while he gets short of breath on hurrying on a level or walking up a slight hill, or climbing 2 steps at a time. So this is 0. This is MMRC 0 to 1, and if the chances of if he has undergone greater than once hospital admission, or greater than twice exacerbation. So this history is very important. If a patient has undergone any hospitalization greater than once in the last year, or he has undergone greater than 2 or 2 exacerbation in the last year. So this grading is important, and that patient falls under this category A. So when MMRC 0 to 1, the patient is slightly symptomatic, and if he has not been admitted, or he has any exacerbation which has been up to 2 or greater than 2, or 1 or greater than 1 leading to hospital admission. So such patient falls in category 1, category A. Then category B is when MMRC is greater than 2. That's greater than 2 is where you have a patient, definitely he has subtle breathlessness, which is more than for the people of the same age, and he has to stop to catch his breath, or if he's, even if he is breathless on a mild exertion, and if he has exacerbation more than once, and which leading to hospital admission, or exacerbation more than 2, and once he has been admitted to the hospital, so that comes under category, category D. So category A is basically MMRC 0 to 1 and exacerbation 0 to 1. Category B is MRC 0 to 2 and hospital admission or exacerbation 0 to 1. This is a simplified way of looking at it. Category C is MMRC 0 to 1 and exacerbation or hospital admission more than 2 or up to 2. And category D is the most severe type, MMRC greater than 2 and exacerbation more than 2 or up to 2 twice. So D is the most severe, and this is how it progresses. So why have we brought down this classification, this ABCD classification? Why the international body has come up with this classification? Because we have this beautiful spirometry evaluation or grading system. Then why we have undergone through this classification? The important thing is, the reason behind it is because this classification does not always indicate patient's severity or patient's symptomatology or patient's condition at present. It does not always signifies, but this category signifies patient's condition at present, his symptoms at present, and his chances of further exacerbation. So that's why this one criteria which has been globally, which has been accepted, and before initiating the drug therapy. I understand this will be a little more fishy for you guys right now, but as you keep looking at this, and you will as you keep reading it again and again, and you keep practicing it on patients, you will very easily learn this classification. As you apply this on the patient, you will very easily learn it up, so don't worry about it. So now the pharmacological treatment, it falls in the two category. One is initiating treatment algorithm and other is follow-up. So the initiation is, again, as I said, this is based on ABCD assessment scheme. So again, as we saw this ABCD, you have group A people where you have 0 to 1 moderate exacerbation and none of them leading to hospital admission, and you have MMRC 0 to 1 and this CAT value is less than 10. So in such patient, bronchodilator is the treatment of choice, is short acting bronchodilator. Either it will be beta agonist or SAMA or SABA or muscarinic antagonist. So these are the basically, this is the group of drug, and it's just basically for the symptomatic relief. You can give up to as much as to 4 times a day or up to 3 times a day on an as an required basis. So they are the mild cases where basically the inhalation of the bronchodilators are given for symptomatic relief. Then you have second category, you have the group B. Group B, well, we have MMRC more than 2, and where the patient is certainly more breathless, and definitely you will try to put patient on a regular long acting bronchodilators, again LABA or LAMA, and the choice is yours depending on the personal perspectives and the looking at the side effects and the patient's disease profile. You can put them on LABA or LAMA. You can start them on monotherapy, and further you can assess how the patient responds to the therapy. And in spite of patient putting on long acting monotherapy on bronchodilators, if the patient is symptomatic, you can, for symptomatic relief, you can always give short acting bronchodilators. Then the group C patients are those with MRC 0 to 1 and exacerbation more than once, or moderate exacerbation more than 2, and leading to hospitalization more than 1. So most important for such patients, LAMA, this is long acting muscarinic antagonist, which is very potent and which is more potent than LABAs, and that can be used as a monotherapy. But certain groups of patients, they do very well on LAMA plus LABA combination therapy, particularly in the C section, in C types of patients. LAMA plus LABA in the combined inhalational, so patient they do very well on this combination, but LAMA as a monotherapy is a preferable choice. Then the group D is again when you have the patient is severely breathless, MMRC is more than 2, and patient has undergone frequent exacerbation, even more than once hospitalization. So that comes under severe patients, and that comes under group D, where you can use mostly LAMA plus LABA or LABA plus ICS, or even LAMA plus ICS can be tried. And ICS especially on patients who are not favorable for LAMA, who have certain contraindication for LAMA, or patients who are undergoing frequent exacerbation, the ICS and LABA combination can be tried on, or a patient who have eosinophilia or high eosinophil counts, where you can try out ICS plus LAMA combination. And there is another modality is LAMA plus LABA plus ICS. That's a triple inhalational combination where you use all long-acting bronchodilators as well as corticoid combination. And as the patients do well with corticosteroids, can be taper off. Now follow-up, we talked about the treatment initiation. The follow-up is again you have to look for the breathlessness or the symptomatology, how the patient is doing on the combination therapy, and if it does well, you can switch on to the monotherapy, or you can prolong the combination therapy. Or patient who comes with persistent, or patient who still have persistent breathless or exercise limitation on a monotherapy, they can switch on to the double combination of bronchotherapy. Or patient on LABA plus ICS treatment, such patient LAMA can be added to escalate the triple therapy. Or patients, even patients with LABA and ICS can be switched to LABA plus LAMA. These are certain tested in trial method when patients, for the patients who for follow-up of such patients. So either if there is a persistent exacerbation, or that if the symptoms hasn't gone, or the patient still is breathless, we can try different combination. You can escalate the therapy, and for patients you can even switch the therapies from LABA ICS to LAMA ICS or LABA LAMA combination. And if there is a blood eosinophil count is high, you can always try to add ICS in the existing therapy. And then you can, even the patient who are doing well with the therapy, you can always try to take off corticosteroid, and you can even try to bring down the de-escalate the therapy. Then this topic, so the next topic is acute exacerbation. We'll talk about it in the next lecture, and we'll talk about the acute exacerbation of COPD, and then we'll take up acute exacerbation of bronchial asthma. I understand this topic must be a little fishy for you guys, and especially the treatment, the GOLD assessment tool and the GOLD CAT severity, patient severity index, and this ABCD assessment tool and the ABCD, the base therapy based on the ABCD, GOLD ABCD criteria. So, but don't worry about it. You will easily learn it as you go across the patients. As you come across several patients, you will be able to put patients under these categories, and you can definitely bring about your own treatment modalities, and you can match the treatment and the patient's condition and what are the treatment choices you have. It's a little bit difficult to understand, but it's not that difficult. With experience and with cases exposure, you will easily understand what we are talking about. So I'll take up your queries right now. If you have any queries, please let me know. So if any queries, we can always take it in the next class too. We will talk about acute exacerbation of bronchial asthma and acute exacerbation of COPD. So no query. So we can close down this session. You can come up with your queries in the next class. Thank you for your patient listening. Thank you so much, class.